Hey guys, Cam here from PhoneDog.com, and it's another special episode of Looking Back, the series where we look back at some of the old and classic phones of our time. Now this week is something rather special. It's the device that kind of kicked off the touchscreen smartphone revolution. Before this device, everything virtually had keypads and lots of buttons, or a stylus and a capacitive touchscreen, and the actual experience of using them wasn't very good. And then this one device came along and changed the industry for the better. It's the reason why now we have amazing phones on the market, and it all started 7 years ago with this. This is the original iPhone, commonly known as the iPhone 2G. It was launched in 2007 and nobody had really ever seen anything like it before. One single home button on the front, the touchscreen was capacitive and it was multi-touch. But more than that, the user interface was made so that it was so incredibly simple that anyone could virtually use it. You just had to see what the icon was on the screen and you knew exactly what it did. It didn't look like anything else before it on the market. The back was made out of a really nice piece of curved aluminum or aluminium. It had very rounded edges, a really nice chromed edge all the way around the screen. It did have a small plastic back panel right on the bottom near the bottom edge of the rear panel, but that was because it needed it for the antenna. Obviously metal isn't antenna transparent, so they needed to put a plastic part on there so that it could actually make phone calls. On the front was one big piece of Corning Gorilla Glass, and that covered a 3.5-inch display. The 3.5-inch display was 320 by 480 pixels, giving it a density of just 160 odd pixels per inch. So in the day it was pretty sharp, actually one of the sharpest displays on the market, and colours were good, and more importantly the touch sensitivity on it, because it was a capacitive touchscreen and not a resistive touchscreen, it meant that it just responded so quickly and effortlessly. What Apple had essentially done with the iPhone when it was launched was get rid of all the clutter, so they got rid of all the buttons. They'd only put the ones on there that they thought was absolutely necessary. So you had a volume rocker on the left and a mute switch, which is one of the best things in the world and still is one of my favourite features of the iPhone. The ability to just switch your phone to mute by using a physical switch is fantastic. Single home button on the front, and on the top was the power and lock key. There was nothing else. There was no back button, there was no call button, no cancel button. It was just amazing. On the top you also had your SIM tray, which was quite a unique idea because it didn't have a removable back, so you couldn't take your battery out. It was all sealed. Also had a 3.5mm headphone jack, which was nicely sized to fit Apple's very own 3.5mm jack from their headphones in, and on the bottom edge you had a proprietary 30-pin connector, as well as two grills, one on either side. One was a speaker grill, one covered the microphone. But like I've already mentioned, what made the iPhone even greater, and possibly what made it really great, was the user interface. The settings menu was littered with toggle switches, so you knew exactly how to switch certain features on and off. But more importantly, the slide to unlock icon told you exactly what you needed to do in order to unlock the phone. So you could press either the home button or the power lock button, the screen would come on, and you knew that you had to slide the slider across the slide to unlock part, and you knew what to do. And that was the beauty of iPhone OS 1. It wasn't called iOS back then, if you remember, but it was designed so that anybody could use it pretty much straight away without any sort of manual. With every other smartphone on the market before this one, to launch an app you first had to go into a menu somewhere to find your apps. Apple got rid of that unnecessary step and put everything on your home screen. They weren't hidden away, and for some people that was quite frustrating, but it was Apple's focus on getting rid of anything that was completely unnecessary and making it as simple as possible, removing as many steps as they possibly could. Now sadly, when it first launched you couldn't download third-party apps, but for basic tasks it had some really nice and beautiful looking apps on there already. The Messages app was fantastic because you had all the messages appear in a thread with really pretty speech bubbles. The Calendar app was great because it used the massive screen to take full advantage and have all the information that you could possibly need on there. But more importantly, it had some great apps on there preloaded like Safari. The mobile web browser on this at the time was simply incredible. More importantly, you could zoom in and out of pages using a pinch to zoom gesture. You could search right from the address bar. You knew exactly what to do with it. It was so easy to use and it was so reliable. Apple's weather app at the time was fantastic because you could arrange locations and it would sort them out into cards and you could flick through them and see 5-day forecasts. There was a calculator, a contacts app. And later on, as the years went on, Apple added other things, and eventually this got to iOS 3.1.3. That was the last software update that the original iPhone got. By that time, you had things like the App Store, so you could download third-party apps. But going back to when it launched, it was clear to a lot of people, especially people that were really into phones, that the iPhone, or the original iPhone, was lacking a lot of features that were in most feature phones at the time. For instance, you couldn't send a picture message, you couldn't record video, you couldn't send files via Bluetooth. It was pretty restricted. You couldn't put a micro SD or an SD card in there to expand the storage, you couldn't remove the battery, but these were all the kind of steps that Apple cut out to make the user experience as good as they possibly could. This is sort of Apple's walled garden, and I think we have to be thankful for it, because without it, this iPhone would not exist, any iPhone afterwards wouldn't exist, and most Android phones that are on the market right now probably wouldn't exist. Now granted, the market would probably be in a position now where they had other multi-touch phones. They might even be running Android, because Android was in development at the time, but they looked like BlackBerry devices back then. So although we can't claim that Apple completely changed the industry and did something that would never have happened without them, what we can say is that Apple actually did it a lot earlier than perhaps people were expecting or were ready for. And it's probably the reason why so many people still want that surprise. So many people want that massive shock, that massive industry-changing moment from Apple every time a new iPhone comes out, and they don't get it. And they don't seem to understand that it's only ever going to have happened once. It can only happen once. It's not going to happen again. And that's exactly why the iPhone, the original iPhone, is probably one of the most important, if not the most important smartphones that was ever released. Even if you're an Apple hater, to suggest that this phone wasn't important, that would be ridiculous. What do you guys think about the original iPhone? Did you own one? Was it too expensive for you? Did you wait until the next generation when they had 3G and an App Store? Let us know your thoughts and feelings. Tell me how wrong I am if you like. I'm at phonedog_cam on Twitter, or you can just use the comments down below. And I will see you again soon.